Oops.
Hello, Mr. Fransha. There is 2 minutes left before the discussion ends.
Yeah, noted.
Muda, can you hear me? Utama, may I know who is the leader of opposition?
Utama, sorry, opposition Russia.
Rashford.
Deputy opposition Chldren, whip is Chldren.
Sorry? I can hear you well.
Yeah, LO is Rashwin, DLO is Catherine, opposition whip is Kuhan, but I haven't changed my name now.
Reply speech speaker?
Catherine.
Chldren, alright.
Yeah.
Mr. Fansha,
Yeah.
is it okay if we delete our debate since Muda is having a technical issue right now?
Yeah, I have no issue.
Mr. Farhan Shah.
Mr. Kuhan, Miss Catherine, Mr. Rashid. Nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me to Malaya training session.
No problem, Mr. Farhan Shah.
Okay, just may I know which motion that you all vetoed?
Vetoed.
We vetoed the second motion.
Do you all know what vetoed?
I think they vetoed the first, huh? Right?
Now I don't know lah.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, we vetoed first. We vetoed.
Okay, thanks.
Everybody's frozen
Welcome.
first.
Is Mr. Wesley Pooh here also?
Farhan, we're here, but our internet's like damn bad. Everybody's frozen.
So we might not be able to turn on our camera as well.
Yeah, actually, I don't mind. If I'm also okay if everyone switch it off lah, just to improve each individual qualities of the internet.
Can.
UN Muda, may I know who is the Prime Minister?
Anis is the Prime Minister. Second speaker is Wesley. Third speaker is Vignesh.
And the reply speaker will be delivered by?
Mr. Wesley.
All right, thank you. Mr. Farhan, is it okay if we start now?
Oh yeah, I was waiting for you actually. The floor is yours.
All right. The panel of distinguished adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good day to all of you who are present today in this Royal Malaysian Intervarsity Debating Championship 2023. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Taki Fatihani and I will be the speaker for this round. Without further ado, let us begin our debate session now. I will start first by introducing all the debaters that will share out their arguments and suggestions for today's motion. Representing the government team, I would like to welcome Ms. Anis Adiba as the Prime Minister, Mr. Mr. Wesley as the Deputy Prime Minister, and Mr. Vignesh Waran as the Government Whip, and the reply speech will be delivered by Mr. Wesley. Next, representing the opposition team, I would like to welcome Mr. Rasbin as the Leader of Opposition, Ms. Catherine as the Deputy Leader of Opposition, and Mr. Kuhan as the Opposition Whip, and the reply speech will be delivered by Ms. Catherine. I will now introduce the distinguished adjudicator for this round. Please welcome the Chief Adjudicator, Mr. Farhan Shah. I am pretty sure that all of you have understood the ground rules for every debate session. However, please allow me to humbly remind all of us of the rules and regulations that need to be adhered to as follows. During the debate, please silence your mobile phones or any device that may produce disturbing sounds. For substantive speech sessions, the bell will ring once at the first and the 6th minute. At the 7th minute, the bell will ring twice.
Yeah, the line is better.
If after 7 minutes and 20 seconds the speaker has not stopped speaking, I, as the chairperson, will mute the speaker directly. And as for the reply speech session, the bell will ring once at the 3rd minute and twice at the 4th minute. If after 4 minutes and 20 seconds the reply speaker has not stopped speaking, I, as the chairperson, will mute the reply speaker directly. Ladies and gentlemen, please be informed that the motion for today's debate is: this House prefers a world where all children are raised in state facilities rather than in individual families. Also, if you are debating, please ensure that your camera is on, and because this Zoom is being live broadcasted. To open the debate, I would like to call upon the Prime Minister from the government team, Ms. Anis Adibah, to propose the motion. Please welcome.
Alright, am I audible?
Kenapa?
Anis, wait, MC is unmuted. Got a lot of background sound. Eh? Okay, it's not Ansi. Maybe she just left audio. Okay, you can get it.
Okay. I won't turn on my camera, okay?
Noted. Floor is yours.
Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, straight to the setup itself. How does the children in the state facilities look like? This looks like any single children who are being born right after they no longer need their mother to breastfeed or care for them, and they can be cared by someone else as a whole. They will be sent to the state facilities, and this is the hard stance that we are taking. A little bit on the mechanism. These state facilities will look like facilities funded by the government, and it will be funded well. And why is that so? The government will have the incentive to do so because, number one, these individuals who have been sent to these institutions are individuals who are most vulnerable in the society, because these individuals are still kids, they're babies, they're infants, they're unable to make decisions, they can't even feed or walk even in the first place. Therefore, there's an incentive for the government to prioritize these individuals and prioritize allocation of funds. Number two, this institution itself, when it has been built and there's a lot of public attention towards it, there's going to be a result of a lot of public scrutiny, a lot of people from within the community itself, as well as international attention. So there's going to be a lot of people criticizing this institution itself. So therefore, there's less likelihood of things of misconduct or maybe like lack of resources or facilities that could help these children grow. Number three, these individuals who have been sent to these public facilities, they're going to be treated like regular kids. These kids will go through things like daycare. These things will they will be provided with enough education for as they go through their life as a little child, right? They will be also able to interact with kids within the facility, also outside of the facility. That means maybe we'll do field trips or whatsoever, so they can mingle around. They could see people with the same skin color. They could see people with the same face, with the same. Basically, they're not going to be isolated in a way where things like they might lose the sense of self, where they might feel different from the rest. Number four, we will take the caretakers and the individuals who are responsible in taking care of these individuals will look like probably civil servants of the state. They will be individuals who are be able to be subjected to routinely checkups in a way where they're going to go through enough background checks to ensure that these individuals are able enough and have the capacity to take care of children. They're just not going to be some random average Joe from the street that you pick up to take care of these children. So therefore, these people looks like people who are educated, and this basically just goes back to the government incentive of wanting to take care of these very vulnerable individuals from the first place. And number five, this looks like all of the children who are being sent to this facility for them to grow up, they could go out to just explore the world whenever they want with supervision, just like how it exists in the current status quo right now. Kids like 16-year-olds, they can just go out whenever, as long as there's adult supervision, right? And finally, number six, these individuals are free to go from this institution once they turn 18, once they're adults, and they are able to make wise decisions by themselves. They can go out, they will go out of the institution, and they can find their parents if they will want to do so in the first place, but that is just not within the debate now. Now, on the status quo, there's already something similar that exists, which are a communal place where people are sent, where kids and teenagers are sent to learn and explore their possibilities and, mingle around with the community like them, which are kibbutz. These individuals are in mostly rural areas, are sent to this communal living to be raised by the state. And a little bit of preempt on culture, if opposition were to argue that they will want the culture to be such a big value in which where you don't want it to be diminished just because you mingle around from people who look different from you, we would rather counter that by saying that we want integration. We want a black kid to mingle around with a white kid, and we want them to actually be able to understand, because racial discrimination whatsoever and hatred towards people from a different background is basically instilled when you were a child. So when you grow up with people who looks different from you, therefore it's easier for you to learn that everyone is the same, and lesser likelihood of them being like a a bad person with a negative mindset of like there's racial discrimination, segregation or whatsoever in the future, because you realize that culture is usually weaponized by the state to pit people against each other. This looked like what we saw in like the apartheid or maybe racial segregation. The state basically are using these racial rhetorics against these individuals and to add more division among the people themselves. Because even if you argue that the culture value is very important, this value itself could be learned elsewhere once they turn into adults and once they actually have a better grasp of understanding the rhetorics and the nuances that exist in the world. Now, straight to argument number one. We want the ability for the kids to actually grow up in a much more safer environment. How does that happen? Because the problem with the status quo is that the kids who grow up, mostly they are at the risk of being at a bad side of the birth lottery and being born in a household with bad toxic relationships. This will look like maybe they will have to go through poverty and the risk of abandonment, because realize that when these things happen, the worst case scenario is that they're being sent to orphanages or whatsoever, right? And it is just worse on their side, because orphanages most often are not taken care of fully, because the government just not put much scrutiny towards them. But once this facility exists, at least more sense of accountability could be held upon them. And therefore, to add on to that, even if these individuals are being born not consented, right? So if they are being risk of abuse, if these parents are having a strained relationship with each other and a strained relationship with their siblings or whatsoever, it's going to manifest in a way where it hurts the progress of the children growing up, because they have to sit at the dinner table, listen to their parents argue every single day, because these kind of things happen behind closed doors. We will never know, because even things like government mandated checks like child protection services or whatever exist, but it is less likely to be helpful, because you realize that the government will only check if a child is doing okay or not if the issue is being reported, and even if it's not, then it's going to be silent and it's going to be harmful for the child in the long run. Now, how state facility fix all of this problem? Simple, because it already has a very constant state funding by the government, therefore it has an equal amount of resources that could be sustainable for the long run. Number two, it has multiple layers of protection in which where there's more likely to be the kids to be treated well, and there's going to be the availability for the government mandated checks, where this is basically a check and balances, where the children will be assured that they will be given enough education, going through all of the medical checkup that they need to go to, and less likely from being abused by the system itself. The impact is that the child are able to grow as an individual with sufficient substance for them to become a full-grown adult in the future. The comparative that in their side, if you argue that the state that has a chance to become abusive, the facilities that have a chance to become abusive, this is symmetrical on both sides. Realize that our side is better because there's a better sense of call out, transparency, and accountability. And it is also far easier for kids to justify the facility actually abusing them in comparison to their own parents who birthed them, saying that they hate them and they don't want them as a child. The mental trauma is worse on their side, and it's a lifetime of struggle. That's why I'm proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Ms. Prime Minister. Up next, I would like to invite the Leader of Opposition, Mr. Rashmin, to present your arguments. Please welcome. Mr. Rashmin?
Yeah, it's just the internet. One moment. I had a swiper from Team 2 into my room. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Judge, imagine as a parent and you just gave birth to your child, 2 years raising that child with care and love, and abruptly the state takes away your child. Just as soon as you finish breastfeeding, the state has an autonomy suddenly to take away the child. I think there are two things I want to question in the framing itself. Number one, who are the children that they're taking away? Notice how as soon as they are done with breastfeeding, it means these are 3 years old and 4 years old who are yet to form formative connections with their family are being taken away with their families. This means the child doesn't even have the full level of extent to know their family itself before moving on to the state facilities. Secondly, who are the people taking care of these people? They claim that these are caretakers, educated and civil servants. Judge, I'm unclear why degree holders or diploma holders in this world want to apply jobs as babysitters. That is why eventually they hire people who are substandard in characteristic. Notice at the point which these people who are not qualified, untrained are being hired, the treatment is being given upon a child is going to be poor. Notice that to scale this debate, if in a constituent there's going to be, it's already hard enough for one parent to look after one child or two child. You are expecting a limited numbers of babysitters to look after 3,000, 5,000 children. These are babies that one wakes up at 1 in the morning, one wakes up 2 in the morning, one wakes up 3 in the morning. At this instance, this becomes very annoying in nature for these people. And notice, these are third-party individuals who have no connection with the children rather than only getting paid. But the third response then is to say, notice how states have an ability to hold parents accountable. But who are the ones who will hold family accountable? Because children can't complain. They can't say against crimes that is being done against them. If a person pinches you, if a person hits you, there's nothing you can do about it. But even if there's going to be complaint, it is going to be investigated internally. That is why the trauma that children exist internally within the state facilities are still going to be particularly harmful. Let's dive right into the framing. Number one, what do these families looks like? Three things. Number one, filial ties with identifiable parents. We have loyalty, love, values, culture, and nurture, particularly with the parents. But number two, unmatched attention. Parents are able to give you one-to-one attention by catering towards individual needs. But number three, then, branches of relationship. You have your father, mother, your grandfather, your siblings, up to your extended family looking after you. Three burdens we would be fulfilling in this debate. Number one, we would prove to you why children are better off with their own family members. Number two, why family would still have the capacity to care for your children, even if they're in worst case poor and abusive. And number three, then, why children are being raised in such facilities harms their development and growth. First argument then is a principal argument, the encroachment of state power. Notice, Judge, how states gives us freedom and restricts certain freedoms insofar these decisions have a tangible impact tied to it, that it doesn't remove your fundamental liberties that are vital for your livelihood. But one freedom that remains to you is your ability to be with your own family members. And why is freedom particularly important? Firstly, family units are your only fallback in these institutions. Things such as advice, guidance, support structures are always going to be considering your own welfare and happiness compared to other relationships. That considerations may vary. But number two, then, these are relationships that remain with you until the very day that you die. This means parents have the choice to have children and should also have the freedom to raise those children according to their own desires, as long as not extreme, which is also being curtailed by state laws anyway, things like domestic abuse. This looks like parents having the opportunity to cultivate you into a certain religion beliefs, moral values that they feel deemed to be necessary, relationship with their own extended family. The decision of state to forcibly separate children from their families, especially if these families have capacity to raise them, is holistically unjust encroachment of power. Notice how you give state undue power over your children, and this is something that should be regretting in the first place. Second argument then, why children should be raised in their own respective families. I think there are four reasons to this. Number one, notice how states, in terms of response to families that, what Ani said in the second argument, that they are poor and abusive, state intervention already exists when that's necessary. Number one, things such as welfare, tax incentive aids to assist poor family already exist. Number two, community structures to help families with challenging backgrounds. And number three, there's already a state-run facilities for families who are truly desperate and don't have the capacity to take care of their own children. And number four, child protective services and foster homes to protect children from abusive families. Notice, Judge, the point of all these structures in status quo is to prevent the worst type of harms from existing towards children. It is a choice that can be exercised when deemed to be necessary. Team government removes people of the choice to have. The comparative on Gov is to say there's less accountability for abuse. This is a simple analogy, Judge. State can hold bad parents accountable, but who can hold the bad state accountable? Access to things like record information, states are able to very effectively conceal, abuse, and scare these children or not to report their abuses. But look at their framing. These are not baby breastfed children. They can't even properly form sentences. How do you expect them to even complain? Why then are children going to be better developed under their own families? There are four reasons to this. The first premise is about the parental love and attention. Notice how children have access to unconditional love from parents. The comparative on government is one caretaker has to look after 20 or 30 children at best. This means you're giving them less attention, and children in turn have to compete for attention with other children. This is harmful as a scale of competition, so much more in government compared to opposition. Second reason then is the individuality of the child. Notice how parents can cater towards the development of child, specifically towards the individual needs and not the group needs. The government, or comparative of government side, is that the state does not have enough resources to cater towards every child's being unique and whatever their needs are. Notice how they have to push for developmental growth and progress only on a group basis rather than an individual basis. Comparatively, on our world, Parents have the ability to send their children to extracurricular activities of their choice. They're able to track their record and able to provide them with comfort over their progress within a long time. Third reason then is the family environment itself. Notice how growing up with your own siblings are much more better than growing up with strangers, because you're able to understand from a young age that these are individuals who are tied to you by blood and you are inherently obligated to them as one family unit. If you were to grow up with complete strangers, yes, government maybe can fear to say you're conditioned to love these people as your own, but it still be problematic for three reasons. Number one, notice the immense sheer number of people where everyone is desiring for a short window of love from the limited number of guardians over them. But number two, the competitiveness where everyone wants to one up each another to be the perfect fit. In status quo, the family, but then it's more opening over that side because you're competing with strangers. But number three, then you're more likely to form animosity because you know you're not related to blood, which makes it easier to internalize hate within those people. But the fourth reason then is the values itself, where family will pass on generational values compared to what the state deems necessary to paint out the picture. This is exclusively occurring only to our side, because notice how parents can tailor towards what is necessary to the child. I.e., if a children were to come out as a gay, a parent is more likely going to be forgiving compared to the state because it's their own child and it's a bond they cannot break. What are the matrices we win upon at the end of this debate, Judge? Number one, notice we have proven to you it is going to be less competitive of an environment. At the point children are competing less for things like basic needs, individuality, and also love and attention, we proved you a better and healthier environment for the child to grow. But number two, Judge, and exclusively, we are the only sites that provides love and attention towards the child's beginning formative ages, which is by basic need for all this child whenever they're growing up. But number three, then, Judge, notice how we're exclusively also able to provide more tailored values to assist the children in shaping individuality in things that are best for them and not what the state believes is to be best for them. So proud to oppose.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rashbin. Now, I would like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister from the government team, Mr. Wesley, to continue proposing the motion. Please welcome. Before that, you and Mother, please rename your position and name before start debating. Thank you.
Hi, can you see and hear me? Okay, sorry, the connection's a bit bad. I'm currently sitting on the floor of my uni. Thank you. I'll take POIs. Okay, I'll ask for a POI. So don't like unmute or don't do anything. I'll just ask for one when I feel like I want to pick one, okay? All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think Rushwin is very convenient with the way that he frames families. Maybe it's because Rushwin came from a good family with people that cared and loved for him and provided good values. But we argue that not all families around the world are as good or as loving as the ones that he came from. We think necessarily there are a lot of instances where families are terrible natures, are terrible bodies in order to raise a kid. They are either poor individuals who cannot cater for their kids, not because they don't want to, but because they don't have the ability, the resources, or the time in order to give to their kid. There are some families who just never wanted a kid to begin with, who the kid was an accidental product of like unprotected intercourse and things like that, where they mistreat the kid because they see the kid as the reason why their lives are terrible. In these instances, which we think are more majority than the loving parents in itself, we think those are the ways where the kids are necessarily harmed the worst. If we can cater for these most vulnerable of individuals or most vulnerable of kids, prevent them from actually existing on outside the house, I think that's a win already, right? But we're content as well with the good parents and why necessarily the state facilities still provide for a problem that's already existing in this law. One call out, one exchange of response, then one issue, and then an extension, right? First, I'll call out on the principle. So Russia spends a lot of the time in the speech arguing about the principle and why necessarily it's principally justified for the state to not overstep its power. It then proceeds to tell me 4 metrics as to why the state already oversteps their power in status quo in order to protect kids. If you concede that kids need to be protected and the state overstepped their power to do so, I'm unsure why is the case the opposition wants to make so many exceptions to the principle in which they first brought out to the case. Either defend your principle in absolute, that the state cannot overstep its power, that it is a parental provision in order to take care of their kids in absolutism, or that is the state's ability to intervene in the areas where they see it's vulnerable. I think at the point in which you agree, or that there's a debate consensus that it is the state's ability to intervene, I think it far gets better on outside the the house where we allow for the full state mechanism in order to fully intervene into these situations and take care of the kids, regardless of the situation they begin with. When you let a kid go to their parents and get raised to their parents, that is a risk you're taking, whether the parents are going to be abusive, toxic, or poor. We necessarily, in a world where we have the consensus that state provision is something that is good and beneficial, we prevent any child from taking that risk or ever doing that, right? One extraneous responses. Rashmi wants to argue that caretakers are bad because nobody wants to be a caretaker or babysitter as a career. Guys, we have teachers that want to teach, but not all of them have like the ability to get degrees. Or we have individuals who love kids, but may not be the smartest enough to actually be kids, right? We think opening these kinds of facilities lets the state open a huge number of jobs or a huge number of career paths for individuals that they never got option before. So yes, maybe initially individuals don't really want to be babysitters, but as far as this thing can exist in perpetuity or exist in a constant way, that there are jobs, there are availabilities, we think individuals will opt into these kinds of things. So I think just arguing that these won't have good caretakers thing is a very niche thing. It's a very like uncharitable, nitpicky thing. I think unnecessarily explain why caretakers are necessarily going to be good, they're going to be vetted, they're going to be judged by the state, and we're going to provide them enough compensation in order for this to be a lucrative job opportunity, right? Maybe not as lucrative as a doctor, but definitely more lucrative as like a street cleaner on the side of the road, right? Therefore, one issue, I think the major issue that comes up in Rashtri's speech as well, directly engaging with a safe and healthy environment for kids to grow up with. So no, I want to argue that a lot of opposition's material contends on the fact that families are at least somewhat good, right? They in no part contend with toxic individual parenting or the fact that individuals may not have the time for their kids. Insofar as these two things are more often true rather than not, we think necessarily a lot of the benefits on the side of opposition just doesn't materialize to begin with. Because note on the first thing, right under my first issue, which the issue is status quo families. Rashmi wants to argue that you get attention and development on their side of the house, how necessarily like competitiveness and animosity grow on our side. We think necessarily this argument only works predicated on the fact that you do get the kinds of attention and you do get the kinds of development on their side of the house. Insofar as we tell you that some parents have to work 9 to 11 jobs where you don't have time to take care of their kids. The kids walk to school, do their own homework, cook their own dinner. That's the point in time where you don't get the same kinds of attention, you don't get the same kinds of development. Yes, we might have individuals stretched thin, but they're not fighting for attention from their caretakers because necessarily this isn't the people that birthed us or isn't the people that necessarily cared for us. We think the concept of found family applies far better on our side of the house when it comes to these kinds of facilities because you're better able to contrive some abilities of better able to derive some ability of care from the individuals around you. So you're not going to be competing with individuals for the arbitrary notion of a caretaker. You're going to be able to better find love and better find attention within your friends and within these individuals because the argument about values as well just doesn't apply to the debate. Insofar as a large proportion of families aren't necessarily the best ones that do cater to these kinds of values. But number two, on transparency and the scrutiny of these facilities. Rashmi argues that states are able to hold parents accountable. Yeah, that's true insofar as they are reported. We necessarily, it's true on your side of the house that it's hard to report facilities. It's even worse to report parents because they're unable to come out from closed doors. We think there's much more familial ties for your kids to be scared enough to report your parents rather than be scared to report the caretaker that's abusing you. We think necessarily if a kid or a baby is abused, we think it's far better on our side of the house because even if it's true on your side, we think this abuse happens symmetrically on both worlds, right? That if a caretaker abuses a kid or like a parent abuses a kid, why it is far better on our side of the house, or why abuse just doesn't materialize, is because there are many layers of transparency, many layers of like scrutiny and public attention towards these facilities that don't happen towards families. Family metrics happen behind closed doors. Because abuse and harms happen far worse on your side of the house, right? That means on a net benefit, we're better able to get transparency and get care for these kids. Insofar as these facilities are ones that people can go in, people can watch, the ones that are government oversight and things like that. If the state was so bad if you claim the state was so bad on our side of the house, I'm unsure why you get the same kinds of innate child protective services that you get or the same kinds of welfare that you get, right? The very simple comparative, I'll take a POI after this. The very simple comparative is this. Even if abuse happens on both sides, and in our worst case being engaging that we cannot deal with the kinds of abuses that happen, it is far better that it happens in a facility because at least the kid doesn't think that why my parent who birthed me is the one that's giving me abuse. Why am I so worthless? We think these narratives are far more traumatizing than the ones that you grew up within the facility. I take the POI, hurry.
Would you also allow states to decide what homes you reside in, who you're friends with, or what courses or jobs you should go for?
Okay, we think necessarily these things you don't get to decide as a kid either. Like if you grew up in a certain neighborhood, you never get to choose to be in that neighborhood to begin with. So I'm unsure as to why the state deciding who your friends are is any different from you growing up in a neighborhood with friends anyway. So this is probably symmetrical. These job opportunities, these friend things are likely symmetrical metrics to begin with. I'm unsure why it changes. Therefore, on the second argumentation, and stick with me here, the eradication of nepotism and nepo babies within society. Note that this is a net benefit and an independent path post-facility right. 3 layers here. First, nepotism exists as a familial concept because family breeds favor and they gain innate nature to favor their kids. Most are bred from family, and these ties go beyond reasons. That means you look like kids getting into C-level employees, university legacies, and political dynasties by virtue of their dad or their mom being there. Why does this help better on our side of the house? It's because we level the playing field. You lack knowledge of who your kids are, you're unlikely to know, and therefore allows for more opportunity and chances. You don't get university legacy admission, you don't get political dynasties, because you don't get the kinds of nepotism into politics that happen. The comparative is this on this argument, right? The weighing here is simple. Other factors contribute to inequality, but a huge chunk of them is from nepotism itself. Even if every other quality is symmetric, we win on this because we allow for more even playing field at the point in which you don't have the kinds of nepotism that breeds from societies that have strong familial values. At the point in which you have these facilities with nepotism, highly unlikely to occur. So proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wesley. Up next, I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Ms. Chldren, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Okay, can I be heard? Okay, thank you. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think team government dismisses the absolute love and unconditional support that your family would have for you by dismissing it and telling you that most families are bad. Is that really true? Ask yourself, are your parents always bad people? Are they always toxic? Or are they sometimes toxic, but they make up for it in other ways? Parents are humans as well, but the state is an entity that focuses on progress, an entity that focuses on good results, and an entity that is usually almost always endemic with corruption, nepotism, and abuse. We think all of this is extremely dangerous when, firstly, you give the state undue power over how a whole generation is dictated, but it's secondly, when you disallow children to have that special bond with their families, something that is important for individuals given that this is their only structure in society to deal with the challenges that people faces. Let's first deal with families having no capacity to take care of their children. I want to respond first to Wesley's insane rebuttal on how principles have to be absolute. Either you choose whether a principle is absolute, which means that all rights are absolute, or they're not. That is absolutely not true. Your right to freedom of speech is not absolute. Neither is your right to be able to undeniably or have undue power over an entire generation of children. The point of the metrics that we provided on team opposition is to prove that where there is abuse, we are able to co-opt a lot of the benefits that government talks about. If families are poor, we have facilities or structures that allows for these families to access things like food stamps or aid or tax breaks for their children. If families are abusive, we have reportive structures that are able to hold these parents accountable. The important point here is that we have the choice, which allows us to co-opt a large majority of the benefits in terms of families that do not have the capacity to provide for their children. Second rebuttal, in terms of families that are bad or toxic. First thing to note is that families are not always bad or toxic. They assert this, they don't prove why a large majority of parents are likely to be bad and toxic. I think that is relative according to each family. But secondly as well, we think there is a lot of mechanisms in status quo to escape that. You can enjoy yourself in school rather than at home. You can find comfort in your friends or your extended family. As compared to government, you're stuck in these state facilities for ever until you're like 18 or something. I don't even know. There's no ability for escapism on their side, and they never even said that you can see your family to begin with. So I really don't know how, if states are abusive on their side, they have that accountability. Now let's deal with like accountability as a whole. Government claims that abuse might be symmetric. Okay, fine, we take that bullet. If that is true, their mechanisms of accountability is extremely convenient. They rely on public scrutiny, but public scrutiny only works if you have access to information. We told you the important and unrebuttable mechanism that a government can conceal records or the public information that is released is only on progress of the state facility, not whether each children is actually individually happy or not. And they're unlikely to do that because these are information that is inefficient as compared to proving that they have enough food for their kids. Governments can excuse their behavior as well. And I think this is tied a lot to politics as well, where people unconditionally support a government as compared to wanting to hold a politician accountable. As compared to outside, children can report their parents. Neighbors or extended family members can report their parents as well. We think abuse is much more easier to be seen because you escape from that family in certain areas. When you go to school and a teacher reports bruises that they see on a kid, when a neighbor hears a lot of screaming and yelling and they report to the police. These are all accountability mechanisms that are exclusive on our side. On nepotism, I really don't know why this is the a priori impact in this debate. The point at which you can't really remove nepotism because nepotism is tied to generational wealth. The point at which rich parents can just say, actually, you're my child, come work in my company. That is the point at which nepotism still exists. This is a weak argument and should not be credited at all. Moving on to argumentation then. Which side allows for these children to better integrate into society once they turn into adults? Three premises here. The first is on side government. Your development is impaired because you're treated as part of the herd and not as individuals. We've proven to you why parents are able to tailor the needs of a child. If a child has special needs, a parent is more likely to cater to that as compared to a government that has to prioritize being efficient. Note that government enforcement is likely to be well or good on side government if they can claim that, but it is not perfect, so they have to cater to the majority and not the deviants in the minority, like your sexual minorities or just individuals that are like mentally impaired. I think the lack of tailoring in terms of values that are imparted as well, the culture that these children are missing out on, or the formative relationship with your family and extended family is important. On side government, they produce adults that will always feel a hole in their heart because they are missing something that is extremely important in terms of the undivided attention that a parent can give you. Secondly, in terms of your lacking of culture inside opposition or inside government, they said it's okay because you get integration, but I think this ignores the different needs of different people. I think culture is the best for integration because firstly, you are able to provide safe spaces within your culture or religion. We think this is important, especially for minority children that aren't able to get that elsewhere, and they don't know why they're being treated differently by the police when they were told, oh, they're the same. We think different needs are specifically important for different like gender or sexual or race or religion minorities that should be firstly be able to have the right to be able to grow up in that environment, but also secondly ensure that they understand why different treatments are as such and are able to protect themselves from the abuse of society. But thirdly as well, in terms of lack of individuality, but before 6 I'll take a POI.
If everyone has a hole in their heart when they grow up in a facility, at least that's equal. Why is it better for me as a kid to see my other friends who have more attention from their parents when my parents work a 9 to 11 job and never see me and never take care of me?
Because you are depriving a large majority of children that are able to benefit from that attention from their parents. On your side, you have one caretaker for like 30 kids in a classroom. There's no reason as to why they get the same amount of attention. All people have hole in your hearts as compared to our side. Some people have hole in their hearts. In terms of lack of individuality, the state is likely to only enforce values that are important to them or things that they deem as an a priori value. So the state has absolute choice over how they raise their kids, and they're likely to prioritize things that are more efficient. For example, corporal punishment to punish deviant behavior, as compared to parents that are likely to be more forgiving for their children. This is important because children make mistakes. They are literal children with undeveloped brains. They don't understand why they're doing wrong, but a state has to prioritize being efficient in the most possible way. Third argument, if Wesley wants to run nepotism, I can run a weird argument as well in terms of lower birth rates. Now parents are unlikely to want to be able to raise children to begin with because they don't see the value in that. They can't grow these children to be an image of them. They can't impart their generational wealth or social values onto the children. Parents are unlikely to have children. You have lower birth rates, lower people entering into the workforce, and your economy becomes ruined. For all these reasons, extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you, Ms. Catherine. Moving on, I would like to call upon the government whip, Mr. Vigneswaran, to continue proposing the motion on behalf of the government team. Please welcome. As usual, please rename your position.
Hello, I am sitting on it as well. So yeah, it's still some of Wesley's work. POI through chat, but I will likely just ask for it because of the protection issues. Can you hear and see me? Okay, good. Just let me know if I drop out. Okay. Starting in, hold on. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think that the biggest failure of the opposition side today was the failure to recognize that there needs to be a degree of charitability, a level of understanding that some things in the debate, if you want it to be A on your side of the world, need to be maintained as A on our side of the world, but also the lack of charitability towards what can and cannot be done, and the convenience in choosing narratives that can support their side while demonizing our side. I think for these reasons alone, op case is likely going to fall. But before I get into anything else I want to do in my speech, I want to just quickly do a few external rebuttals. Firstly, on the entire idea on absolute love. The first direct response I have to this is that love is something that is inherently subjective. So if you want to run the entire analysis of love, you can't just throw it out as though it's some weighable metric that's extremely objective. You need to explain how it's intrinsic towards each child. Because even if I'm super charitable at the start of my analysis, in assuming that every parent loves their child, which is a really convenient analysis, love, due to the fact of it being subjective, means that it's different things towards each individual child. Meaning you cannot come up here and say that each child is going to have the maximum amount of utility from the parent, owing to the fact that there's some semblance of love towards it. But the second is I have no idea why then are these, if it's objective, things that are replicable and things that we can do from the facilities. Because if your argument is things like having attention and people caring for you and people like feeding you and all of that, there's no analysis as to why this is something that is exclusive towards the side of opposition. The point where we already met you from the start of Anis's speech, the process as to which we vet these people, the process as to which we're going to choose these people, I think then it becomes a wash. But let's flip the argument then. Because if you want to talk about absolute love and that being something that is extremely important to the child, it is unclear to me why the harms in Kite's and Rashid's speech don't mechanize and become worse on the side of opposition. Because if it is true that absolute love is something that is so important in the debate, doesn't that mean that anything owing to the transparency metric on your characterization of the state being bad become worse? Because when you want to report your parent for abuse, you no longer report your parent for whacking you or hitting you on the head. You instead weigh it against this entire idea of absolute love. So yeah, they love me, but they also beat the shit out of me. Which comparative and which narrative do I pick? I think that needs to be explained on the side of the opposition, because the point where this is true, it becomes extremely more detrimental towards the kids on the side of opposition. If they want to talk about abuse, they lose on the comparative. But I also want to talk about the entire idea of love within the state provision. Because if we can see that both sides, I think we both need to consider on our side that state provisions A exist, but B, that the state cannot be abusive. Because in order for the debate and the arguments and the premises that both sides are contingent upon to work, you need to have a state that is somewhat beneficial towards people, a state that is somewhat competent. Because if you want to argue that CPS can do its job and that you have proper reporting mechanisms, these things are only accessible, panel, the point where the state is a good actor somewhat. Because if the state is corrupt and the state is as bad as the opposition wants to say, it's unclear to me why when you go and report yourself to the authorities that your parent is beating you, it is unclear why they wouldn't just turn you away. So I think that becomes a wash in the debate. But then we need to flip the argument, right? I mean, we need to be more charitable. Let's be more charitable and say that you workers are somewhat abusive. That is where the accountability metric kicks in, and the state, similar to the mechanisms of opposition like the CPS and stuff, can come into play and help you to like remove you from this dangerous worker. But B, just owing to the entire analysis on how love is harmful that I given to you earlier in the rebuttal, then this means that it becomes more likely that you report these people in the first place. So if you want to argue on the ability of the state to be the state provision, number one, we say that we can wash it out in the debate, but we can also flip that analysis and explain to you why, even if there are certain actors within the state that are bad, we better control and regulate it on the side of government based on the metrics that we've given you. But the third is on this entire nuancing of different treatment that came out in Kat's speech, right? Because if they want to talk about the different treatment that you're going to face as a worker or an individual within status quo, I would, like, as a minority within status quo in this house prefers world, I want to number one point out that this is a wash. Because if you want to talk that some people are going to be treated differently and be like, oh, I did the same amount of work as this person, but don't get the same outcome, that becomes a wash when you weigh it against Wesley's speech. Because if you come from a family that did not have a strong background on the counterfactual, you might get really, really good grades, but you don't get into Harvard because your parents don't donate $1 million to build a new facility. But secondly, then let's flip this argument, because we would argue that cultural things become less worse on our side, the point where you understand that this house prefers motion. Because understand that most of the differences in race that we understand to these people owe to the cultural backgrounds and the class backgrounds of these people. This elevates Wesley's argument even further in the round, because the point where you understand that people don't hate minorities because they are minorities. You hate minorities
because of the association that these minorities have. For example, you hate Indian people because you perceive Indian people as poor. The point where all of you grew up in a state facility, it is unclear why, even if you want to argue short run, this house prefers motion, you're not supposed to do that. You assume that this occurs from the start. But even if you argue and assume from the short run that this is something that will happen, in the long run, these things pan out and become less and less exaggerated within society. I think they lose on this entire idea as well. I want to very quickly posit you the framings that they've given you and why they stand true and important in the round. Number one, on the nature of this facility, Anis has already told you how these facilities are likely going to be good within her framing. Secondly, how these caretakers are going to look like, where do we get the employment from, and where do we get these people? I want to note at this point, the point where Anis gives these things, they can't just be convenient and say, oh, these people aren't going to join. Oh, these people aren't going to have kids. The point where we met it straight from PM as to how you're going to do these things, I think they need to actually engage with these things and explain how it works. Even if Kuan wants to come out here and do it, I think by virtue of the fact that they have less opportunity to respond to it, it should be devalued. But also this entire idea of interaction with kids. Understand that we've already told you how the interaction with kids becomes better on our comparative than it does on the side of opposition. And we explained that from framing from the get-go. Before I get into the three issues of the debate and why they are important, I'll take a POI.
Why is it justified to take away children from families that are mostly happy, caring, and loving? The context that you're talking about only applies to abusive parents who are very small in scale and remote examples.
The entire idea of mostly caring, number one, is weighed against the entire idea of absolute love that I've already given to you. Meaning, if Catherine wants to say that most people have parents who have a complicated relationship with them, we think it's justified the point where abuse actually gets less reported on their side. Secondly, due to the nepotism that Wesley talked to you about. So even if you have caring parents, then you need to argue why necessarily removing the utility, removing the countless number of people who now get locked out of access for a lot of things because of the nepotistic nature of these things, why that is justified. Because even if you want to argue that everyone has a loving and caring family, I've already explained to you why that is something that is subjective, but only complicates things such as reporting. The issues of the debate then very quickly. The first idea on protecting children and the development of the child. I think that the weighing for this argument is very, very simple. It's that we've already proven to you that we have greater degrees of transparency, we have greater degrees of reporting mechanisms. Weigh all of this against the subjective metric of absolute love that opposition wants to give you. Because even if it is true that we lose on scale towards that metric, I would argue the point where kids are protected, where the kids aren't traumatized for life, that becomes something that is better. The second is on nepotism protection. I've already explained to you why this is better and weighed it against any of the cultural analysis that they wanted to give it to you. The point I've already explained to you why these things only trend towards becoming worse on the side of opposition. The third is on how culture is inherently something that is divisive. I've talked about this earlier. I think the weighing for that is if you never had a culture, you likely never would have bought into these narratives in the first place, meaning it doesn't become a problem on our side at all. For all these reasons, proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vishwaran. Moving on, I would like to invite the opposition whip, Mr. Kuhan, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Give me 1 second, hold on. Okay, wait, can I confirm if I'm visible and audible? Wait, okay. It is crazy that this team says, even if children are neglected under their world, at least it's equal. I think it's fucked up that we live in a system where you equally abuse children, where you equally neglect children, where you equally deprive any ability from them to get potential. Equality is not a great metric. It's the fact that children are vulnerable and deserve their best chance, which is why opposition ought to win this debate. Two clashes in this speech, I'll weigh and respond as I go. First, I want to talk about abuse, because they made the whole case contingent upon abuse. First response, judge. For any blanket policy to address a problem, this problem must happen in majority of the circumstances. They just said abuse can happen. There's a possibility, but whether or not it's a huge problem, they will have to preemptively not give any option for children to be raised their parents is something I would contest. My first response is to give you statistics to show that why this is not a big problem. WHO says 1 in 10 children have faced some form of sexual abuse in their life. UNICEF says about 5% of their children, 4% of children in the world have faced some level of tell you who is abusive towards children. So that's an even smaller percentage that are done by families. So my first question is, why is it that you want to go to this drastic blanket solution for a small percentage of problem? You know that blanket solutions only come when the problems happen a lot. Secondly, even then, blanket policies have to weigh in the pros or the and why this outweighs any form of problem that you want to solve. You must explain why this problem is the most important, that it can outweigh any benefit that parents can give. I'm going to dynamically deal with the fact that they say love is subjective. Love is subjective, judge, but fundamental needs are not. That's why things like UN Convention of Rights of Children objectifies the standards of how we can give love in terms of protection, in terms of dietary requirements, in terms of recreation, in terms of development of potential. All things you lose out because you don't have capacity. 7 reasons why they don't have capacity. Firstly, this prefers a world in which debate, which means thus far they were not actually engaging in a global perspective of this debate. This debate also has to take place in developing countries where for sure there's no capacity to run these things at large, like orphanages, all also GG in these places. I don't know how we can do this, but I'm not going to drop that out because this hasn't been an issue in debate thus far anyways. Secondly, even if this debate were to take place in developments where they have capacity, they still have other priorities: elections, inflation. Even developed countries face inflation, development and infrastructure. So I'm unsure why you logistically have capacity to take care of all kids. Number 3, even in the best case that you do have money, you probably don't have money for every single fucking kid, because you cannot control how many kids there are in a given country. And more importantly, they lose it by the point in which their own setup says, when you're not breastfeeding anymore, you go to these facilities. Church, when you're not being breastfed anymore and you go to these facilities, that's still a baby, bro. That's still, you stop breastfeeding 1 to 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, you're still a fucking baby. And babies need proximate attention. Younger preschoolers need disciplining. I'm unsure why these caretakers are superpowers that can handle babies on one hand, younger preschoolers on one hand, teenagers and adolescents on one hand. It's likely the case that you're probably going to ask the teenagers to take care of the babies. All is going to be really fucked up in the way that you navigate this, because you can't prove how logistically this is something that's possible. Fourthly, you don't have enough resources, even the best case, to maximize potential. Yes, maybe they have 100 magical caretakers, maybe. They have so much of money. You cannot maximize potential. And that's what I want to contend. Love is subjective, but so is potential. You cannot make sure if a kid wants violin classes, they want more tuition classes. How can you tailor every single thing? Literally no analysis on why a single kid that has subjective ideals and potential is something that you can uniquely meet. Fifthly, let's take Vignesh analysis that states are corrupt. How can reporting work under their side of the house? That's why our analysis down the bench was to explain. Yes, in instances where states are corrupt, at least when we report to a state that a parent is abusing, they can take some level of control or law, legal mandate to make sure they curtail that problem. But if the state themselves are corrupt, how are you going to report it? Because these are state-run facilities. You can't blame or legally make the state liable for abuse that are happening. So literally the analysis hurts their case even more if states are corrupt. Sixthly, they are wrong to say reporting is the only way. But first, I'm going to deal with that idea first. Assuming reporting is the only way, you don't need the kid to do this, guys. You go through community support services and NGOs that can identify this. A lot of healthcare services that kids have to subject to be in schools, doctors can identify this. School personnel, your counselors, teachers can identify this. Literally, if the mechanism is reporting, which is wrong, reporting can work externally, not just by the own kids themselves, which proves why a solution works. But secondly, we don't think reporting is the only way. The fact of the matter is, when I mentioned to you community support services, for example, there's also child helplines that other people can go towards. These are all not just reporting, these are preemptive ways that you can look and also identify where those things work, so that the mechanism to actually hold them accountable is much more multifaceted than they say. But finally, they never dealt with the argument on state agenda. What if this debate takes place in China? What if this debate takes place in conservative countries where they have a state agenda? You're going to tell the kids, don't grow up being LGBT. You're going to grow up the kids saying abuse or corporal punishment is the best way to go about it. And I'll argue that it's disgusting. Disgusting because oftentimes culture and personalization is what we uniquely provide. Because parents understand to some extent where their children best fare out, what values that are probably more proximate towards their generation culture. This is far more proximate and individualistic, rather than a state that might not have an agenda, that have pushed their own nationalist agenda that will be bad for those kids. Let's weigh this very quickly. Number one, Their problem, which is children abuse, is not even a big problem here, which means they can't have a blanket solution to solve this. Number two, it's far worse in their world because I've proven why structurally they don't have capacity to either meet the needs of the children, but even the best case scenario, maximize the potential of children, which we definitely can. And finally, if it's the case that it's corrupt states, it's far worse on the other side because it's corrupt states that control the state facilities and also can happily wash away that pushes that's not bad for this kid. Second issue of love and well-being. I just want to prove when Wesley said you're more likely to report on your caretaker because you know your caretaker is your parent, it's concession that children view these caretakers as not their parents. It's concession that they view these people as just other individuals taking care of me and not their parents, which means they drastically drown out the ability for them to love and care well-being. The first thing that we have is exclusivity in terms of welfare. Children need parents for them to teach them, for them to soothe every favor, for them to handle every tantrum, for them to walk these few steps of them navigating through life. They say you can go towards your friends under their world. That's bad. That's exactly why we don't allow smaller children who are young to be taken care of their older siblings in adoption centers, even if they can. Because siblings, friends are not the best people to take care. You need parents. And if people are socially conditioned in their world to look at caretakers as just other people and friends as their parents, that's bad because they are not equipped to be parents in certain circumstances. Second, what people have unity in the family. We have culture on the other side. We have siblings and extended family. They're not likely to be competitive. In your world, you're going to fight with these people to have the love of the caretakers. In your world, you're going to resort to your friends to actually take care of you when they're not equipped to make the decisions. For all those reasons, I think it's clear opposition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kuhan, for your speech. To proceed with the next agenda, we will now continue our debate session for this round with the reply speech session. The reply speech shall be delivered by the opposition team. Therefore, I would like to invite Ms. Catherine to deliver her speech and conclude the debate. Please welcome.
Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two issues in my reply speech. Number one, which side are children better off? And the second, which side are families, society and families better off? The first, on which side are children better off? I just want to point out that government heavily relies on the framing that firstly, all families are bad. Secondly, state will run these facilities perfectly. While we're willing to concede that the state will probably allocate a lot of resources into the state facilities, they won't be perfect in enforcement because a state is an entity and not a family. I want to also bring back our principle on undue power that the government is now going to have over an extremely impressionable generation. I think this already will win us this issue because there's no justification inside government outside of families being abusive as to why the state can do this, especially in the very likely scenarios that probably 50% of families do actually give a fuck about their children, do actually want to take care of their children, and they have the capacity to raise their children. The premise that we rely upon is that the state is likely to prioritize resource maximization because the state is not going to entirely put their entire budget into the state facilities. They have other priorities like the economy or winning elections. What this leads to is three things. Number one, a severe lack of attention and a high incentive for children to compete for attention from their caretakers. Notice the concession on team government that they do not view these caretakers as parents, but more of caretakers that have to provide for them. These children are also people that are craving attention to begin with. They are fussy and they're immature and they want someone, an adult, a role model to give them that attention that they crave for. The allocation of caretakers is the issue here. The point at which you allocate one caretaker to like 20 to 25 to like 30 children at worst is where children have to compete with other children for that attention for their caretaker. But also secondly, this leads to a lack of family values and individuality, which is especially important for minorities and completely dismissed upon by side government when they argue that integration is good because we remove all individuality. We argue why this is extremely harmful to people that do not follow the grain of society, people that are mentally different, people that practice different religions, people that do not follow the necessary grain of society. We do not think facilities are able to care for them, the point at which families are able to tailor the needs and values that these children care for. But thirdly as well, the enforcement of state propaganda and focusing on being like as efficient as possible is likely to result in the state trying to be as efficient and cut corners as much as possible, which looks like the state probably not giving as much attention as they do to every individual child. Thus the child is growing up with impaired development as compared to our side, or just the state prioritizing things that makes their job better, like corporate corporal punishment as compared to parents that are more likely to be forgiving for their children. Let's deal with abuse then. The government team claims that the state won't be abusive because of public scrutiny, but note that their response does not evolve anywhere past this. We've proven to you why the government is able to conceal records or only publish records that are favorable to them, or why the government has the incentive to protect their image. We've already proven to you on our side how we have different agencies that we can report this abuse to, or escapism from different structures like your friends or your family, extended family, or your school. These are all reasons why abuse is severely mitigated on our side. The comparative is that first they be able to tailor values to what a child needs. We have emphasis on culture. We have less competition for attention, and we capitalize on love that is being subjective because government deprives children of parents that can actually give that care and attention. Second part of my reply speech, which side is better off? I just want the judge here to just compare these two arguments. The abolishment of nepotism on side government versus lower birth rates on our side. Is Gov really going to abolish intergenerational wealth, or are parents less likely to have children? We think the point at which parents don't see an incentive to have children when they can't impart their own values on their own child is where individuals are less likely to have children, and there's secondly going to be worse integration back into society because there's no family support structure that these people have now. People are deprived of individuals that unconditionally support you, especially when you're an adult. For all these reasons, extremely proud to oppose.
All right, thank you, Ms. Catherine. Now I would like to invite Mr. Wesley from the government team to proceed with the reply speech and conclude their debate. Please welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah, hi, sorry, I'm on the floor again. 1 second. All right. I'll start in 3. I'm unsure why opposition wants to hinge a lot of their case on a bunch of whataboutisms. What about if it's in China? What about if the parents are good? What about if the caretakers are bad? Instead of actually engaging with the metrics of where a fair debate should take place. The note of the strategic meta here, the unwillingness of opposition to even make the smallest trade-off until maybe in reply, proves to you how weak their negative case is. Their only positive material is that kids just somehow live slightly marginal better lives in these somehow whataboutism issues. Like in a world where it's China, a developing state, and that states are bad and parents are good, then their kid lives a better life. They have multiple criteria that they have to fulfill in order to ensure the kids have good lives. I think government has already fulfilled our burden very simply. We've taken all the trade-offs necessary in order to prove to you why necessarily, even if our facilities aren't the best, even if our caretakers are not great, and even if the kids don't get the kind of love and support, the comparative is just that it's far better on our side of the house, where the kids get to fully fulfill what they have, rather than being not only lacking provision, but also lacking provision from the people who are most proximate to them and should provide the provision, the kind of trauma that it deals to the kid. I think that's been explained in our speeches already. Therefore, the debate has to be about, Judge, the metric of which the unique position of these families are. In a world where the state can provide for both individuals via being welfare for the families when they're for kids when they're with their families, or provision for the state policies, where is it then the unique position of the family placed in order to provide unique benefits for the kids? Insofar as there isn't unique benefits, and there's always the risk that the family structure fails, that is where government takes the lead, right? 4 things in the speech. First, on state provision and abuse, right? I think it's very, very uncharitable for our team opposition to continuously argue the state abuse occurs and the state provision is bad, right? We argue that state abuse is likely symmetric and likely provision. If they are bad on our side of the house, the kinds of welfare mechanisms and checks and balances for child services on your side just doesn't materialize. In order for debate to function, it has to be assumed it's a functional state. We cannot maybe assume where the state takes place, but it has to be functional at best. We need a lot of their attacks about a dysfunctional state on our side of the house just doesn't materialize. Government opposition refuses to be charitable. We take the burden here. But secondly, on the toxicity of guardians. Number one, we've already argued why it's unlikely due to vetting processes and the ability for them to not have the same amount of stress. Number two, we argue why there's significantly better checks and balances at the point of transparency. They want to straw man us and say public perception doesn't exist. We didn't argue just public perception. We argued individuals coming in from the state in order to check constantly. We argue for better reporting mechanisms because you're not reporting your parents, you're reporting your caretakers, which you necessarily don't have that much emotional connection happens. But we've also argued that even if it's symmetric and even if you can't report in the untransparency mechanisms, it's less mental trauma on our side of the house because it isn't the parent that birthed you that's abusing you. It's somebody who you don't care about, which means you're less likely to feel inadequate. You're less likely to feel that you're lesser because it isn't your fault that these kinds of things happen. Number three, on love and affection. And this comes not exclusively from from Kat's speech and just drop it on the rest of the debate, right? Number one, I'm unsure the exclusivity of love and protection, even though we can give it to you in terms of maybe your caretakers or your friends. Number two, I'm unsure the uniqueness of this love and protection. That's why individuals need this so much in order that they are dysfunctional in their life without this love and protection. Kat proves to you analysis without any impact. But number three, even if that happens, we necessarily be rather everyone with holes in their hearts rather than individuals with bigger holes than others, comparing themselves and saying, why didn't my parents love me? What was it I cared about? Was it my fault? These are the kinds of narratives we don't want. Finally, on equality and nepotism argument, we want to note the lack of response coming here. Kat can't rebut this in reply. It is an exclusive equality mechanism because maybe we're not solving the generational wealth gap, but at least removing a large proportion of areas in which individuals do use mechanisms in order to climb social ladders, remove that and at least make a better equality playing field. So not only is this independent of the rest of the debate, but it also proves you exclusive benefits to why individuals get to upskill after they're 18, after they've leave facilities, after they leave their parents. These are exclusive mechanisms. So all that, if opposition refusing to take an actual trade-off, government providing our mechanisms unsusceptible to multiple metrics, we take this debate cleanly. So proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wesley, for the reply speech. And we are now reaching the end of our session today. Congratulations to all debaters and thank you for your wonderful speech. Mr. Farhan, would you like to have some time before provide your comments and verdicts?
Yep, definitely. 5 to 10, I'll come back.
All right.
You can call them in now. Oh, is everyone in? Alright.
Yes, sir, you may start.
All right, cool. Hi, President everyone is here. Welcome back. Thanks for inviting me to judge Malaya pre-UADC selections. So I just want to jump straight to how this format is going to be. I'm just going to jump straight to the verdict, then also my justification to how why I give the win to this. Ultimately, I give the win to the side opposition. Congratulations, opposition, and commiseration to the government. So here's how my justification looks like. I'm going to break up into two things. Number one, I'm going to broaden the idea about the principle. Then second, go to the practical. The practical, I have 5. Thanks for making my life very miserable. So let's go one by one. Principle. Because I think there's two big clash that happens when you use two principles, which has two layers to this. Number one, the duty as the state, and second, it comes to the freedom. Let's go on the first layer first. State has the duty to take care of the most vulnerable. Because I think when it comes to this, there is I think huge unjustification coming up from AGAF to explain why state necessarily has a duty on few reasons. First, they explain that when it comes to individual are exposed to vulnerability, dangers, abuse coming out from certain family household unit, hence it justifies for you to come in. The second part, it needs to be sorry. Oh, sorry, I assume that's laggy. So that
Rashwin, please mute your mic.
Hey, Mr. Rashwin, Mima. Right, moving on. So, the second part is about you need to be principally absolute when it comes to you implementing certain principle because you need to get the maximum utility of it. First few problems I have why government unable to edge over this. Number one, argue in first few things to stated that when it comes to vulnerability, I'm sure why it needs to be at that best because I think I think necessarily able to wash it out by explain when it comes to protecting the most vulnerable on those particular principles, they also have it in a sense. They tell you that there's multiple alternatives saying that state intervention when it comes to giving welfare, giving incentive to help the poor, helping those people who are desperate, providing foster home, providing child protective service. This also extend to the things that when it comes to children necessary needs the help, there is like a child help hotline center, things that you necessarily able to help those kids when they child protective service at the point which they really need it. The conclusion of this principle is to say that God wanted to argue that you need to have this principle in order to help the most vulnerable, are also able to call up and say we also have that. So on that sense, they necessarily able to mitigate and justify why this is why that necessary that case. The second part also why are necessarily able to leverage this better because it comes in Mr. Cohen's speech to explain when you wanted to take the principle of absolute to help the most vulnerable, why then it needs to come to the aspect of you taking away other people's back to their first principle of freedom, and then also back to the idea about why you need to take away certain family unit which is supposed to be okay. Because the point which that in status quo, there are multiple state intervention and other alternative and counter mechanism to help those people who are in need. But the second, God necessarily did not explain to us why is it on this smaller percentage of people who really need those help, who really need protection, is worth of a trade-off for you to trade off like the 90% or 95% of family unit which necessarily are okay, even though they are poor, they still have the capacity able to give love, even though it's absolute, even though it's subjective, they necessarily to give it why that is justified for you to trade it off. And third, they also necessarily able God also necessarily also able to explain that when it comes to freedom and individual utility, you're able to have choice how whether they want to have children, how they wanted to take care of their children, how they need to assert that value and how they want to nurture their children. Those are the things when it comes to choice, whereby government don't necessarily put prioritization as something that I think God need to explain why that's worth of the trade-off. Because the extent of that also God managed to explain that when it comes to state, even if it is true, state has the ability to take care of the most vulnerable. The point which that's not the biggest state priority because also able to explain when it comes to a nation wide as a whole and wanted to give utility, states have bigger incentive to care things like inflation, economic policy, or infrastructure development because they give huge net as a whole. So the point in which that Gov still necessarily unable to explain and extend why taking children, even though you have capacity, give net utility benefits just because you want to protect the first 5% rather than 95% doesn't able to elaborate and show us why that actually gives huge net utility and benefit to the country as a whole. I think government necessarily unable to leverage on when it comes to the principle. But second, let's move to the practical, which has 5. So let's move on the first layer. And I think the biggest first clash is the idea about the abuse and treatment. I think these are largely has been established from the first part of the speech all the way. Why then? What are the things that Goff necessarily bring into this debate? Goff bring this debate because in comparative, the reason why children has harder ability to call out or wanted to report abuse towards the authority in this case is because they love their parents, they value their parents, hence they to a certain extent concede to all this treatment that you have. So the second part in comparative, if you have a state treatment, you then necessarily able to call out because this state treatment itself, A, run by the government itself, B, it also run by elected government, hence you have the ability to have check and balance, and you also have the ability to necessarily like call out government for necessarily have a horrible facility or maybe mistreatment that you have within the facility itself. Why on these two premises is still insufficient? Gov able to address that A, when it comes to reporting, it don't necessarily mean it requires children to able to have ability to report. It can go to the extent of external things like your neighbor and your family member able to do so, even though the children don't have the capacity and the right thoughts of right mental thoughts to call it out. They also say it also extend to things like when children able to get treatment for abuse, you're able to allow doctor able to see, you're able to have teachers able to call it out, you're able to have schools council to able to detect this. All this also having policy that all this civil servant and other external policy also add other like external body also to able to report this to the authority to call it out. The third also they're able to say that there is also other external, even if it's not this individual, there's also other external NGOs, things like child care services, etc., to make sure that or maybe provide the hotline to actually A, able to preempt this issue for even worsen, and B, able to immediately allow all these organization and external body able to intervene when things get horrible worse, able to protect these particular children. So on that part, are able to leverage. But even if that's not the case, and facility under government necessarily do a better job, here's why it is still insufficient. Up also in response, when it comes to states, there is incentive for them to A, cover up all that shits behind back door. So A, the transparency is even harder because they're able to cover a track record. B, is even also harder because so that's the first part. B, even if it's true that you're also able to have like policy, like necessary things like call it out or election to change the government able to extend. But the point here is that the moment that state necessary able to justify certain action and continue to push for propaganda why they're necessary good, it's even harder for people to necessarily see all those bad things because government necessarily only able to portray the good thing they have within those facility. And third, because God also argue to the fact that how then in those particular years of your children right after your breastfeed all the way until 18 years old, when that how and when will there will be an interaction between parents and the children, will they able to see each other? It's even harder for parents to even A, have incentive to know what's going on with their parents because not sure how parents are likely able to visit a children within that facility, and B, it's even heavier incentive for government to able to cover this up. So on those particular reasons, are able to necessarily leverage that even if abuse happen, all these avenues does exist to provide form of protection and escapism for these children, and at the same time, Gov necessarily unable to leverage and able to explain even like the accusation coming up for up that A, the facility more able to be covered up, incentive for government to able to cover their cover it up in order to protect themselves and etc. So on that abuse doing tick towards up. The second part, the idea about the capacity to able to love and care, because I think both sides wanted to leverage why this is important for the child development. Let's go on Goff. Why Goff wanted to bring into this debate. Goff explains that there is, and to a certain extent, capacity that state facility able to provide the attention and child development, things that are necessary able to provide a caretaker it looks like civil servants are able to government necessarily able to check them out, but B, this also looks like individual who have passion wanted to take care of the child and government necessarily able to welcome them. Why even this is still insufficient? Number one, it's not just because of op necessarily explain that the attention and the interaction between what you have within parents and the children, but it's also because op argue that will you necessarily have the capacity and the ability to give, because the comparative is between one parents with or like 1 to 2 children, one unit of family member to with 1 or 2 or maybe few children, in comparative with one caretaker over hundreds of thousands of children out there. What this leads to, Op accused that this leads to a competitive environment whereby even if it's true love is something all these children wanted to seek for, it's going to be a competitive nature whereby one wanted to get acknowledgement over each other. Hence, you don't necessarily create an environment that you necessarily able to reach out. Even if you're able to do so, the interaction, the capacity the caretaker able to give is not necessarily able to maximize, because it's like huge unit and the attention span that the caretaker able to give is lesser. What's the comparative op necessary able to bring? Op then explains that the interaction between you and your parents is going to be a personal interaction. Second, parents is necessarily going to have not just best interest for you to able to develop the child, but rather they're able to pour all the values that the parents necessarily meet. So the interaction is going to be more direct. But third, even if we bite the bullet and explain that it's going to be harder because parent might be busy and etc., or also able to extend this family member is just not one person. They also have like towards the extended family, like your uncle, auntie, your grandparents, and etc. Meaning, or maybe their cousin, etc. Allow that form of bad external interaction rather than in comparative. Or also necessarily explains like if you only have one caretaker, that's the only caretaker that you have. So you don't have another option to able to deliberately give those particular love that you have. So on those particular accent also not necessarily able to like weighing this out to say that the interaction that you have is more direct. You don't necessarily create those particular competition. And third, like even if your parents are do so because they are busy, those are the excellent option that the parents necessarily able to have and the incentive for them to care because they want the children better off for their well-being. The fourth, one, two, three. The third about culture. So I think this was largely pushed coming up from Op to explain culture is significantly important because the most vulnerable stakeholder that you have in these debates are minority parents bringing up the minority children. So this is significantly important to them. Op explains that this is significantly important because lacking of culture don't necessarily allow them to have safe space and is only avenue for when everything else is just so screwed up. Sorry, I can't curse and like and they can't go anywhere else. Culture is the only place where necessarily able to fall back and ability to have all these small marginal minority community able to grow up together and also able to be strong and able to push forward in life where everything is so harsh, where everything just reject them. Largely was pushed in Miss Catherine's speech. What are the closest response coming up from Goff? Goff responds, we just need to trade it off and we want integration. Few problems. Number one, I have no idea why integration is something that this gives significant and importance towards the child. And second, if it is true that culture is the best option for this minority kids to be able to fall off, why then losing that out is something way more important over the benefit of integration. But the closest attempt coming from is to say, this is a prefer world debate. So things suddenly is going to be normalized. Why that's the case, why that's true, I literally have no idea why that's necessarily the case. Because I think that's require even more explanation, even though I can see those particular new perspectives coming up from it. It's really unclear. The fourth part, the idea about equality, because I think this was also the fourth premise about equality, which also was largely trying to push in Mr. Wesley Pooh's speech and also reaffirm in Whitney's speech to explain equality is something that we need to reaffirm, where different classes exist. When you're able to bring all children come in, the government necessarily able to treat everyone equal and everyone going to be treated equally and hence be able to mitigate all the large harm when it comes to nepotism, etc. Few problem why this is insufficient. Number one, I'm really unsure why when government treatment within this facility literally leads to when children interact with each other means they're able to further not look at the different classes that exist in society, but B, even if it's like practically able to remove it. Things like, you're able to like not distribute all that wealth towards one particular child, and you're necessarily able to symbolically and practically further enforce nepotism within society. I'm unsure why that's case, because I think Mr. Kuhan's speech already called out, yeah, you are in that facility until the age of 18. Once you're out, the parents will come in, hey, you are my child. I can also continue to further exert the dominance and also further entrench the political dynasty that any parents have. So unsure why under your side that this will largely be mitigated, because wanted to explain that it largely does not. Op call in two things. Number one, Op necessary already pointed out that unsure why equality necessary can be achieved under your side if you have everyone in within facilities. Op also questioned out that it's not necessarily true, because once you opt out, the parents will find you anyway, because like you're heir or something. So means that not sure how under your side you're able to extend on that. But the last part on like why I write bad for the country. Oh yeah, how this is going to be bad the country as a net, right? Because I think this is where largely Op wanted to explain that West is true to a certain extent that this debate needs to be in a way that is charitable, that state has the obligation and has the care to necessarily like not screw things over and like not allow an horrible version of a state to able to take care of this facility, because the opposition case necessarily accused that we can't run this debate, because what if you have actor like in China or India or whatever country wanted to insert its influence and dominance within this country, and the objective part when it comes to this facility is to able to have capacity to take care of children wherever parents cannot because they might be toxic and abusive. The only problem I have why this necessarily unable to leverage this, because not necessarily able to explain that states still have incentive for you to push a certain propaganda. That's the first. The second, are also able to explain each family unit has their different value. So from here, if parents able to insert that narrative and value towards their children, especially you are the minority, not just your sexuality, but certain belief, this also act as a check and balance necessary, able to be the counter version of that narrative of what propaganda the state wanted to push for. So I really unsure why under Op case, that is that the unity value is something is good, but B, like the eraser of the counter narrative or the counter value of what society wanted to push for, or what any parents wanted to indoctrinate in the children in something something good for a trade-off, etc. Lack of explanation is also lack of explanation and weighing to explain why that's the case is also reason why Op takes this debate. On that two clash and 5 additional layers to the practical impact is also the reason why I give the win to side opposition. Congratulations and commiseration.
Thanks a lot, Farhan.
Thank you for the feedback.
The floor is back to the speaker. I think she want to take picture.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Farhan, for your data feedback. We now will proceed to the photography session. So to all debaters and educated, please open your camera.
Camera rosak, sorry.
Alright.
Yeah.
Muda is not here. So okay, we'll proceed with oh. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you so much for your cooperation and for your time spent here.
All right, thank you for the debate.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for justifying my wife to have children. Screw you all. Bye.